Welcome everyone to episode 7 of the Real Profit, Real Perspective podcast. Most people can't communicate. I'm Connor Malatesta, managing partner at Markoff and Malatesta CPAs, and I am joined by my second favorite co-host, Ryan Bannister, owner of One Up Advisors. Ryan, how you doing today?
Well, you accurately put the title into your communication there with your compliment compared to last episode.
It seemed like once we were done recording, you were starting to get an air about you, so I had to knock you down
Built me up too much.
Although this title I do think is a little more suitable for general audiences than I think my other working titles of please respond to my emails, you assholes, and y'all motherfuckers don't know how to communicate. I think we workshop both of those and then figured that probably isn't good for publicly posting.
I don't know if you could put curse words in the titles, but it does accurately get the point across.
I'm sure at some point we'll figure out, can we do it? We'll limit test YouTube and Spotify and all that good stuff and Apple Music. Then we'll get the email that'll say, you're not allowed to do that. I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought this was America. And they're like, oh yeah, that's right. And the obscenity laws and all that stuff, you fascists. So, Ryan, what did we want to cover today besides spending, I think we agreed upon 50 minutes venting about people's inability to respond to our emails?
Yeah, that is a big one. Oh man, just trying to think through this one and communication as a whole. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. And, apart from it being like just the part of everyday life, I mean,
communication is is one of the core fundamental experiences of the human condition. Is pretty much if you get brought into this world, at some point you're gonna have to talk to another person
in some way or shape or form, and that is currently what we're teaching our 15-month-old son. Who his main form is crying and some sign language. So,
sounds like some of our clients.
Yeah. It's funny how we keep our basic instincts.
I'm running out of money. Please help me. And go,
it works pretty well,
You're going to get a response from us, just...
apart from crying every time something breaks or is wrong or you need food, what, I guess I go either internally or externally. Tools that you use, or like, what are you guys doing that helps you communicate with clients, between each other as a team? I don't know. Where do you want to take it?
I think that's a pretty good point, and then we can probably save the more deeper discussion on interpersonal communication and all that later. I mean, in terms of, so we have my team is about half a dozen people, and I've got a mix of full-time and part-time employees that work for me. So, generally it is easiest to communicate with the people that work 9 to 5 and are always there. So we use Slack for a lot of our internal team communications. Once upon a time, we did everything via email and text, and turns out that that's not really a efficient way to communicate with half a dozen people to keep everything on top, and it just turned into a nightmare. We were just using email to communicate with clients, and we would constantly forget about following up on things or not see emails come through, or the clients wouldn't see emails come through. So we got ourselves an automated request system for when we need to put together, documentation requests and things like that. It will send automated reminders to clients until those requests are satisfied, so that we don't have to remember to communicate with clients. Hey, you still owe me stuff. I needed to do the work you're paying me to do. would you mind giving me your goddamn bank statement so I can close out the month and have my project list be shorter and give you your financials so you know what's going? No, please, please respond to my emails. I want to let me help you. I'm okay. Definitely, definitely not what's been going on every time we go through our month and close process of please, for the love of God, send me stuff. I mean, for us, though,
Yep.
it really is a mix of Slack for internal, email communication for external, and then a project management system because, being able, for us communicating with clients, having those constant reminders, it took a lot of time on us. And as we've picked up more clients, we got more work going on, more projects to juggle. We just quite literally could not remember to communicate with everybody in time.
Yeah.
And so we had to look for a different system. I know for you, you use email a whole lot, but how are things kind of working for you guys now?
Fairly similar. So I've actually been brainstorming if there's something, even using Slack for communication with clients or through like the project management system, like you're talking about. And with my part-time bookkeeping assistant, we're using Slack to communicate as well. Cause I've found too, like email and text, especially a lot can get, even though Slack is still text based, like I think a lot can get lost in that medium. So having so many things centralized in a place like Slack or whatever software is really helpful. So we do that. Yeah. So always trying to figure out the best way to manage things like that. And I think the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil is, very present in some of these things. So trying to mitigate that as much as we can.
It's amazing how you also start to get that sixth sense of when a project that's falling behind has just about hit the point where you're going to get an email about it at
Right.
at that, and then you go, oh, yep, there's the email. Glad I was already thinking about how I'm going to communicate the fact that we're behind on this because of one thing or another, and or
Yeah.
you took way too long to give us stuff, and et cetera, that kind of thing. It's also
Right.
it's always interesting how the more people you throw into a mix, the more difficult things become. I mean, we internally, for total transparency, our cross team communication. So we have, as the people, I'm sure nobody remembers from episode 0, but we do a lot of the ongoing financial work for clients. So every month we're in there doing stuff. My team that I work with doesn't do anything relating to any client tax needs. We have my tax partner handles all that, does an absolutely phenomenal job at everything. And so does the half a dozen full-time professionals we have on that side when it comes time to handle all the client tax needs. But in a normal kind of day-to-day communication, we don't really talk a whole lot. Never mind just the fact that financial accountants and tax accountants are kind of natural enemies, much like the Scots and the English, or the or the Scots and the Welsh, or the Scots and the Scots. Damn, Scots are a contentious bunch.
The list continues.
Throw in a little Simpsons reference for everyone over the age of 40, I think, at that episode. But that's something that we've been working on with Slack is how do we make sure that when projects are completed and are ready for, tax prep, for example, how do we convey that information from our team over to the tax team? Because normally we don't really, there's not a whole lot of reasons why we're talking a lot on the day-to-day basis. If I'm closing out, May's books, usually there's nothing there that has me going, oh yeah, by the way, for the tax return and all that, unless it's a real serious thing going on, in which case we're going to have a meeting about it anyway with the client. But in general, there's not a lot of kind of cross communication in that instance. And so we've been trying to use, just to make sure that, for example, they know when projects are completed, actually using Slack for that kind of cross team communication, to have one dedicated chat channel for if they need to talk to us, if we need to talk to them, that we can go ahead and do that. Yes, I can directly message people on the tax side. That's not really what we're getting at. It's having that systematized place to try and get everyone to communicate in the same way in one place so that everybody stays on the same page. Because if there's one, it's amazing how when it's just you, communication is easy because you know what you're trying to communicate with yourself. Soon as you've got somebody else or five somebody else's or 10 somebody else's or 20 or more, it's amazing how it really turns into a game of telephone.
Absolutely, man. And that reminded me of something earlier that going down this rabbit hole too. How do you do it, or are you tailoring communication to different people? Like, you can have your tools, but then different people communicate with different styles. So is that something you focus on?
That's a good question. So I'm gonna break it into two different components. First, I'm going to talk about kind of the internal communication that we have depending, and then I'll talk about clients. So generally for us, if I have to communicate with anyone on the teams, for example, it's pretty much going to be through either Slack or email if there's a particular thing that I want to just have hit their email inbox. So if I'm talking to
Mm-hmm.
anybody whose name isn't Matt Markov CPA, it's going to be a Slack message, or I'm going to be in the team chat or the tax team chat or the cross team chat, or sending an email to say, here's what we need to do. We're sending a direct message that way through Slack. It pretty much
Mm-hmm.
goes through Slack because I'm also trying to make sure that they know that the expectation, if they need to communicate with me, is going to be through Slack. Now, when it comes to me and Matt talking about stuff, Slack, phone calls, text, kind of just whatever we're working in that moment. It's one of those where it's just a little whatever's most convenient at that time. Sometimes if I need to get more of an immediate response or something that is has a little more gravitas to it, I'll call just to have that, oh, Connor's calling, is probably something we need to chat about, and you get more of an immediate response versus sending a text for some update or a message on Slack for here's what we do, or having a message in the partner chat for here's some stuff we've got going on. So
Yeah.
it kind of, with between the partners is a little more, we just kind of do whatever is going to work best for us depending on our schedules, and then for everybody else we pretty much, the expectation is Slack and email, just because then it makes it easier to have everything in one place. I don't need a dozen people texting me stuff and trying to keep a dozen of those text communications straight when I need to have all that information contained in Slack just for, documentation purposes and keeping track of everything. And so it's not just on my phone in case I get a new phone. Now
Mm-hmm.
for clients, the more you pay me, the more willing I am to be flexible in our communication arrangements.
Makes sense. Makes
putting
sense.
it putting it very simply, we've got clients that use instant messaging apps. I've got clients that try to call, they'll text, they'll send email. Usually for clients, it's going to be email communications is kind of our primary. I'll tell most of them when we just have kind of a compliance relationship, if you need anything, shoot me a email, maybe a text. If you try and call, you're probably not going to get a response because I'm wrapped up in meetings and have other stuff going on. And usually it's not life or death where you need to talk to me right now. I do have some clients where we are set up with kind of some more specialty instant messaging and stuff like that, and
Yeah.
they have almost unlimited access or responses for what's going on. I may respond to their messages at 11 o'clock at night, but that's because they are our larger clients and they get special treatment because they're
Yeah. And depending
larger.
on the situation too.
Yeah, when it's just even just messages about things, it is one of those of a, the larger the bill that we get the special your treatment. I'll be totally transparent. What's the phrase? A whore. That's what I am. Um, I'm not sure if I can say that on a podcast, but I just did. It's our podcast. They can't stop. But I mean, that's really, I balance half a dozen different communication channels really at any one particular time with things. A lot of it just comes down to kind of staying on top of stuff as it happens. But how about you? I'm sure you don't have quite as many different communication channels, but I know particularly when you start dealing with people in personal and all that, and you get the texts and the phone calls and all that, and somebody wanting to talk about things. How's
Yeah.
your life with all that?
Well, I think it's just the nature of our business for one. I mean, things pop up really quickly, especially with money.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I need to buy this thing or I don't know, this invoice comes, whatever the example, but I've tried recently to start, I guess mitigating is the right word, but I don't know. Planning that out a little better because you kind of alluded to this earlier of like phone calls or sudden things like that. I think a lot of our days is, I know for me, it's planned out. Like I'm blocking time for things to at least attempt to be efficient and stay in the same like mindset. So if I get a phone call, especially, I mean, if I'm in meetings that day, like like Tuesdays or Wednesdays, heavy client work days, like if I get a phone call, it's probably not going to get answered. Your best bet at that point is to schedule some time through my Calendly. And usually you can do that like same day with this certain appointment, like a
Mhm.
30-minute call, schedule it. If I've got time, let's do it. So I'm trying to be efficient in that way. And I guess kind of like manage client expectations in that regard. But I've also recently started working to like tailor how I send information to clients. Cause I think at least what I've experienced with financial planning with the personal side of things is there's some people who literally just don't want to hear anything. So, if there's something I need to send them, it'll be a short to the point message where they get the details they need and nothing more because they don't need it nor do they care. There's
Mhm.
some people on the other end of that who need every like detail of this process walked through. So, that's either a detailed email, which can work, but sometimes that gets a little too much and you need a phone call or a Zoom or something where you can talk these things through. So I've been trying to be more cognizant of things like that and it's worked really well so far. So
Yeah, I think a lot of my meeting process is similar, except I pretty much have the caveat of I don't really let people do same day meetings just because when I wake up, I like knowing when I have meetings, what I've got going on.
same.
Surprises just because I'm planning out the kind of everything in the morning or the night before, and so
Right.
adding something else, unless there's a oh my god, it's a crisis or something really just like, okay, fine, we'll go ahead and deal with that, kind of depending on the nature of it. But it's always trying to keep hold of our time for communication and not get over inundated with meetings is always kind of our occupational hazard here.
Yeah, and I mean in the end it serves everyone better, even that client who might not necessarily talk to you that day that it comes up, but that same thing can happen on another client that might disturb that person's time if you're mixing them up or changing it. So it serves everyone better when you can standardize things like that, I think.
And it just planning and everything. And I think I'm gonna try and segue this into kind of more the topic that I had in the back of my mind when I was initially bringing up communication is, I know we've talked about our how we do things, and I wanted to include that as a just a bit of an illustrative guide of kind of the differences in communication styles and systems between smaller organizations, larger organizations, et cetera, et cetera. But what I want to kind of segue this into is the idea of communication in the context of your business or working with people. Because ultimately, when you really get down to it, I think a lot of problems at organizations, and these just become exacerbated as an organization gets bigger. Sorry, bitter
Yeah,
too.
better too.
Both of them, both work. Is a the old phrase. Now, what we have here is a failure to communicate. And the more people you've got, the harder it is to convey information up and down the chain of command, or we constantly gripe about people not responding to emails. right? Or request that we have documentation, stuff like that. And what I wanted to kind of get into is the role communication plays really in running your business and the things you prioritize to make sure that you stay on top of, or the impact
Hmm.
that it's going to have in your reputation or working with your customers or your clients. One of the biggest things in our industry that makes clients drop an accountant, honest to God, is not even subpar quality work. It really isn't. It comes down to failed, delayed, or non-existent communication. Usually we get the,
Yep.
yep, they dropped off the face of the planet. I haven't been able to get any responses. I'm finding somebody else. That's why I'm talking to you. And
Yeah.
one of the big things I see a lot of businesses, and particularly business owners, when they get busy, one of the first things that kind of falls off is ensuring that they're communicating with the people that they need to in order to keep things running. As the external accountants, we are at the ass end of every priority list of who needs to be told what's going on. Which, when you, all right, I'm biased. I'm going to say it right now. I'm biased. But if you objectively look at it, you would think that making sure that the people that are responsible for keeping track of the money know what the hell is going on. And oftentimes, we are in a constant fight of, you did what? What is happening? What is this thing? Why is this here? The
Right.
hell do you mean you just did this? And what it really boils down to is the owners not communicating well, or thinking it's important to communicate with other individuals what's going on. And that's
Hmm.
why really the title of this is Most People Can't Communicate, because all of us have inefficient and imperfect ways of communicating information. You know, every time we record an episode of the podcast, we have information that we are attempting to communicate to everyone, and we go through and we have an idea and we talk a lot and we pray to God that whoever hears it gets it, the information is beamed into their head from the words that they are saying. But it's never perfect. Look at interpersonal relationships when you're trying to explain feelings, right? Anytime you read a book, try to explain what it is you're feeling to somebody else, it always feels like words can't adequately convey the emotions that you've got deep down. A lot of them don't seem to have possess the depth that, your experience does. And I think the lesson in our ramblings and rantings about communication in this episode, what I kind of want at least some people to take away from what I rant about is to really look at, how do you communicate or talk to um, the other people in your life? How do you make sure that they know what's going on? If your management in anything, usually failures in management are failures of communication. If the team's not performing, it's usually because the team doesn't know what the hell they're supposed to be doing, which I know we've seen time and time and time again. God knows you can talk about the interpersonal problems you've seen when you start dealing with people and spouses, for example, who have, let us say,
Absolutely.
subpar communication styles between the two of them.
Yeah, and it almost goes back to our last episode as well on just emotions and how that kind of bleeds into things. That also affects your communication 100%. And it can get messy when you blend all of that together. But, you know, it, I
This is such an open-ended episode for what the real kind of takeaway is. I think we started this in a, we'll talk about communication and just rant about it for a little bit, and then it's a, okay, well, where do we begin? Ironically, where do we begin communicating about communication? I mean, Christ, they've got majors in college that are literally called communications, which ironically, I'm pretty
yeah.
certain everyone I've seen with that degree doesn't know how to communicate. So,
And I think
not
that's where it's on us as whether you're a service business or if you're selling a product, I mean, people have to know what the expectations are from you, and you have to know what your clients expect as well, so you can deliver that in the way they want. Because, like you said, if your advisor isn't communicating with, I mean, I see it all the time. Like, people will say, yeah, I just, I signed up with the guy who was associated with our work 401k plan, and I met with him once and never heard from him again. So it's the classic thing of what their expectations didn't match for what the service was. So I think
And
that's
is that
really important when you're communicating, is you have to know what that person is wanting from you as well.
so in that circumstance that you just said, would you call that a communication failure on the part of the customer or on the service provider?
I would say mainly on the service provider, but I think I mean, communication's a two-way street for sure. So if you are on the client end of that, you need to be vetting your advisor or whatever fit X business into like the product you're buying or something. Like, you have to vet that for your own needs too. Otherwise, like, you're going to be doing it on the fly when you're working with this person or buying it, and then say, 6 months from now, you're like, oh crap, this isn't the right fit after all.
Yeah, I definitely think, particularly in the business context, one of the biggest ones, when we work with clients on an ongoing basis, and particularly if we start to advise on stuff, there's a expectation that I took me a little bit to understand that this was the expectation. And honestly, I didn't fully grasp the experience until we had some other things that we were doing where I had to engage other professionals. And they pretty much did that usual, didn't tell me shit as to what was going on. And I'm sitting there going, man, this sucks. Oh God, is this what it's like to be one of ours when we drop the ball? Oh God, I never want to let this happen again. That
Yeah.
was a sobering day, but there's an expectation for us in professional services that we are pretty much going to guide clients step by step through the process. I am going to tell you exactly what you need to do at this point, exactly what you need to do at this point, exactly what you need to do at this point, and exactly what you need to do at this point. You shouldn't be sitting there going, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing right now. It's our job to tell you what you're supposed to do, to communicate, here's what we got, here's what we need, here's what's going to happen, here's what's going to happen into the future.
Yep.
But really, that whole relationship, even if you're buying a product from someone, and you've got questions. Anybody who's ever had to deal with customer support, for example, knows full well the difference between good communication and bad. Call Comcast and see if you enjoy that experience of trying to communicate problems and get any sort of resolve. Spoilers, you're not. Versus if you're calling a company that's got a reputation for great customer
Right.
service, customer support. I don't call customer support often. I usually just kind of grit and bear it. So I can't actually throw an
I
example
mean,
off the top of my head.
yeah, hell, I mean, that's how some companies grew to be the size. Like Amazon, I think, is classic, or I think Zappos is one of the ones you read about. That's like a classic business textbook example of, like, we just literally do whatever the customer wants, and that's great customer service. And look at them now.
Yeah, somebody starts complaining, and then their immediate prompt trying to get that taken care of. And it really, from the business standpoint, just the literal act of communicating quickly, even if it at times is
Yeah.
subpar, is oftentimes better than not saying anything at all. Now, of course, responding quickly and resolving the problem is the best. Communicating, we're going to get this taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what builds from a customer or end user standpoint. That's what builds, trust when we have clients that send us questions. I know my poor tax partner deals with probably 10 times as many questions as I do, because
I can
everybody,
only imagine.
man, everybody loves to send tax questions and emails about what their tax bill is going to be like, or what's going on with taxes, or that kind of thing,
Yeah.
which I hear from him nonstop of just the inundation. His usual one is, I started the day with 60 emails, I received 70 emails, I responded to 80 emails, and at the end of the day, I had 90 unread emails in my email inbox. Meanwhile, we're over here begging for responses from clients so that we can do our jobs and
Right.
say, can you please tell me what's going on? And they go, no, we don't want to talk to you. And I go, okay, fine. But they love his responsiveness to questions, being able to get an answer in 24 hours or less of, here's
Yep.
what's going on, here's the issue that we're facing, this is, and they feel taken care of, and it makes them feel good. And that's why we retain clients through that, is from that responsiveness, because we've seen accounting firms that don't do that. When you're trusting people with your money who disappear to Neverland Ranch, doesn't make you feel good about it. But it's still
Right.
true, even if you're not a service provider, if you're a retailer or whatever, being able to communicate issues and things to your end consumer. Customer support, they feel taken care of, they're having problems. And weirdly enough, doing that is just one little thing that will just naturally make your business more money, because it builds that customer goodwill, which is, I think, particularly these days, something that a lot of businesses have forgotten about.
Yeah, and I mean the example for me personally that comes to mind is, like you said, when a client will email a question or, hey, this thing came up, what do I do? And definitely not perfect about it, but I shoot for, like you mentioned, at least a 24-hour response time. And if you can't get the solution in that time, at least I'm responding with, hey, I got this message, I'm working on it, give me like till the end of the week and I'll get you the full answer. Because if I can't get you the full answer now, and it's going to serve us both better for me to do more
Yep.
research or whatever I need to do to get it. So I think it's being upfront with things like that. And like I said, I'm definitely not perfect with that, but it's the marginal improvements. Like if you can shoot it and get it 90% of the time, like it's better than what I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, although you always have to look out for I keep telling them, pushing it off, and then they start going, what in the hell is going on? We got a client we're
Yep.
working on where I'm waiting on their attorneys to send us a ton of documentation, and the attorneys have been communicating that they're having issues, pulling things and all of that, and there does hit a certain point where I go, I don't need another fucking follow-up. That stuff is still, get me the
Right.
stuff. Like,
Yeah.
there's a certain point where you start to go, are you just spending your time drafting responses to this, or are you actually working on what I need you to do?
Yeah.
Get it done. And that's part of the prompt communication. The I do want
Yeah.
to segue this into, because we could talk about the customer client and all that, but I think it really boils down to, if you want to make more money, oftentimes just responding to customer questions. If you're a small business and you've got to maintain those relationships, answer your fucking emails. Honestly, it truly is as simple as that. Everybody goes, oh, I get so many emails, I've got so many emails of things I can't respond to. Yeah, so does everybody else. um
Yeah.
not to not to
There's ways to get around that too. I mean, there's virtual assistants out there who will literally manage your inbox for you. You can get them template responses where you're not just sending like a blanket thing to somebody, but you help this VA be able to respond to emails as if it were you, or then if it's really important, tell you that, hey, this is the one you need to focus on
Mhm.
to respond to today. So, I think even that's like not really an excuse of like quantity of emails,
I mean, if you want to use it, then it's like, okay, fine. Then you're gonna lose customers and clients, and you're gonna have problems, because you're not gonna deal with the core fundamental. But you got to hold yourself accountable to. You have to deal with this in some form or another.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure we're starting to reference that episode every subsequent episode.
It's a great one, man. And
Common theme of cut the shit, hold yourself accountable, and deal with the nature of the problem.
one,
Why
I
are
mean,
you?
best case too, your business is growing. Eventually you're probably gonna get to the point where you couldn't physically respond to all this stuff anyways. So you need to get the solution in there before you get to that point where you're dropping the balls and like hold yourself back from growing to that point,
Yeah, and I mean I think that's usually particularly for new business owners. They only realize that they have to start to make changes is when it starts to hurt because of the amount of kind of failed communication,
Yeah,
failed emails,
100%.
the ball getting dropped. It's not until they get the learning lesson firsthand that they then go, "Oh yeah, I need to make a change." Because human nature, we're real good at pretty much assuming, well, things are fine right now. Why do I need to make any changes? We
Right.
are a terrible, absolutely terrible at seeing problems before they happen. And anybody who says, no, 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 we're, humans are really good at that, I'll show you a liar. I think the other part, though, when it really comes down to communication, this is the one that ironically I think is even worse than when you have poor communication with customers and clients, is internally having poor communication if you're working with a team. If you're a solo entrepreneur, all right, I hate to break it to you, but most of what I'm about to say is probably not going to be relevant. It's more of a planning thing for the future. You'll get more out of the idea of communicating with your clients and your customers and making sure to respond to them quickly. This next part, if it's just you, really just think of it more in the context potentially of family, right? But
Hmm.
in for what I'm going to say here, I'm going to talk to those that have a team that works for them, whether that's one people, two, 5, 10, 20. One of the books that I read that really guided a lot on how I'm trying to structure our team, and I will be totally transparent and say that it is definitely not perfect yet. I've gotten some feedback from my guys that we've got some pretty good processes, but I refuse to think that this is what the final end result's going to look like. One of the books that I read that was really, really instrumental in kind of an understanding of how team dynamics really need to work is Call Sign Chaos by Jim Mattis. Jim Mattis was the former Secretary of Defense under President Trump in his first term for his first 2 years. Jim Mattis has been called the warrior monk. He's been in the Marines for 40, 50 years. I mean, he is a lifelong warrior, I think is what he's been called.
Hmm.
He's a big proponent of reading and learning and, having an educated soldier force, really. And so Call Sign Chaos covers his career from the beginning of his time in the Marines all the way through up to the point where he was tapped to be Secretary of Defense. So it doesn't talk about the Trump administration or anything. This just covers his career going from starting out, going through officer training, if I'm remembering it correctly, all the way through to when he was, Joint Chiefs of Staff or whatever it was, and at that really, really high level. And there was one bit of wisdom that really stuck with me from that book. The US military has a very much a bottom up command structure. What I mean by that is in comparison, the Soviet Union, when it was still around and not called Russia, had very much a top-down command structure. When you've got guys in the field, right? You've got your soldiers out and they've got their orders. Their orders are very much set up almost like a Google Maps GPS. You're going to start here at this time, you're going to march here, then you're going to turn at this time, march here, etc., 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 until the objective is complete. Now, the thing is that if things don't go according to plan, there is no backup and things become chaotic. The kind of general differences is that with the US military, we offer the boots on the ground squads a lot of leeway in the decisions that they make for what needs to happen. So, what Mattis had talked about is that when your troops, your team, understand the commander's intent, they can then execute knowing what it is you want them to do. So rather
Hmm.
than having to tell them, you're going to do this, then go to this, then go to this, then go to this in order to capture this hill, it becomes by 1700 hours on the 24th of February 2026. We need to have this hill captured because we are moving to this point to take control of this area. And then the troops on the ground know what is expected of them, and they can operate knowing that that's what the end objective needs to be, because the goal of the mission, the commander's intent, has been clearly communicated to everyone executing what needs to happen. And the thing
Yep.
is that when you are running a team of people or you are running a business, it is the exact same thing. Just because you're not sending people into combat, what generally happens when you get larger and larger organizations is you get a greater and greater of separation between the decision makers and the people on the ground. And they don't have the perspective of the people on the ground need to know what's going on so they can make decisions. The people up here don't know what the hell is actually going on in the ground. And you end up having organizations that almost recreate the Soviet command style of they just tell you what you need to know, what you need to do, exactly when. And when things don't go according to plan or something isn't what the command thought it was going to be, everything goes to shit.
Hmm.
The takeaway from this, because I just tossed a whole lot of information, is when you have a team, it is vitally important that the team understands what they're supposed to be doing and why they're supposed to be doing it. I have had conversations with my team where I said, look, here's how the whole command structure here in the firm works. I'm using command just because we're on kind of a military topic. I said, look, here's how this works. Here's how our team is supposed to work. It is my job as the partner to get the work, oversee the work, price the work, make sure we get paid, and make sure everything meets quality control standards. It is the job of all of you as the not partners to do the work, communicate with the clients for any other additional things we need, and to get the work done so that I don't have to be
Hmm.
involved in doing it, and to ask me questions when you're not sure. That is how our team is supposed to work. That they now understand the nature of the work we do, bookkeeping. They understand I'm expecting you to do this work, to take ownership of the work, but to communicate with me problems, issues, things that we need if the client's giving you any trouble, that kind of thing, so that I can go and focus on other stuff. Here's the deadlines that we have. Here's what's going on with the client. Now you guys can kind of take that and run with it. And then it's my job as they work through to provide training, to provide support, to provide the processes so they can do that. And what happens a lot of times in other organizations, larger ones, or people that they suddenly find themselves in a management position, is they don't understand what the point of the team is in the first place. If you've organized a team, you have an objective, you need to make sure that that objective is communicated with everyone so everybody knows what they're doing. It's pretty much the I show up to work and I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. That means that that is a failure
Yep.
of leadership to communicate the objective to the workers, and then everything goes to shit. So the moral of the lesson here is communicate the point with the team so that they know what they're supposed to be doing, and that will alleviate many, many, many operational problems, and then people are allowed to think on their feet and adjust accordingly. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And, I know you said there's not a lot of application to solo businesses, but I think there is in that lesson too, that the first thing it makes me think of is like standard operating procedures, or like you have an operations manual or workflows that you're following, because when you're solo, yeah, it's just you, but your business still has an org chart. It's just you and all the seats. So when you're doing 6 different jobs in a day, I've definitely had the days where you sit down and you're like, I don't know what I'm doing today, even though I have all the things to do. So I think even like being able to communicate that stuff to yourself through planning, and when you know what tasks you can do that day, you have some sort of checklist or a process. You can open up as if you were like an employee doing this job, and go do it yourself.
It also gives you a chance, honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, which is funny because I was in this situation, to plan for the future of how are you going to communicate things if you want to grow and expand and have a team. How do you how do you set up that process so that when you've got to communicate all the stuff to somebody who doesn't have your same level of intimate experience, how do they know what to do
Yeah.
in that which is
Yeah.
communication. I mean, that's the core, like, pretty much every problem between people, every problem in business, problems between nation states boils down to what we got here is a failure to communicate. I mean, marriage
Mhm.
counseling is literally an entire service based on spouses not knowing how to communicate with each other, even though they live together and, know each other better than
Yeah.
everybody else. And you still have problems on how to communicate what's going on.
Yeah, and like for your business, like you said, what better time to build those things than when you're in the seat doing it? And that when you know like the things you hate doing the most in your business, or that you aren't necessarily the best at, that you want to hire someone for eventually, you work through it, build that operations manual or checklist, whatever, and then you've got it for when you do outsource or hire for that.
But Ryan, I'm terrible at communicating. How do I get better?
I think that's how you do it. You work through some sort of standardized sheet. If it's between you and a future employee, or I don't know, you could even do it for client communications maybe, but that's, I think, where it comes back to setting that expectation, or knowing what your client expects from you, or what your employee expects from you.
I'm going to tie it back because I love making references to earlier episodes, that what ends up happening oftentimes, the way I like to think, I don't know, maybe I'm conceited, that I have gotten pretty good at communicating with clients, communicating with the team, communicating with you. That, but the way I got there was by making attempts to communicate information, seeing whether that information was landing or not, if the other person understood what I was trying to say, and
Right.
then in the future, making changes to how I was communicating that information, which I believe is the same thing as making decisions.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how much in life, when you really boil it all down, is just the whole process of learning anything is just an iterative
Yeah.
experience. You do it, see what happens. If you're trying to get better, do it, see what happens, adjust the next time. I know we both learned a lot of our communication lessons on having to go through review notes when we were financial auditors, and how do we document things in such a way that the brand new, sparkly eyed, not soul crushed staff accountant that was going to be hired in the next year would understand what the hell we did when we did our work, and how do we communicate
Yep.
that? Or how do we document our stuff so that when the partner comes in and does the review, we don't have an ungodly number of review notes because they leave notes saying, why did we do this? It's
Yeah.
all clearly laid out. I don't understand why this is highlighted. It looks like somebody vomited on this Excel sheet. Right. And it I know we learned a lot from that, and it gave us a lot of opportunities to constantly refine our communication process. But it really comes down to, because communication is a two-way street. If you're saying something to someone and they don't understand what you're saying, it's not just their fault. It's also your fault on how you are trying to explain the information. If I explain a client's financials to them, going over a profit and loss, and they don't understand what I'm saying to them, I'm not doing my fucking job. You're gonna be like, I don't know
Yeah.
what half this stuff is. What do you mean that normally this is a debit balance? I don't understand any of this. And then I said that, well, that's just is what that's not the point. The point is so that they have to understand. It's a two-way. You're just as complicit in it
Yep.
as the other person is, and you just have to constantly work on it.
It's like when someone speaks another language, like me speaking English louder doesn't make them understand it anymore.
Wait, that doesn't work? Uh-oh.
I mean, maybe that could still get the point across, I guess,
Do
potentially.
you speak? How do I do sign language louder? Is that what the clapping is for? I think though, because I know we're this episode's running a little long, which is ironic in an episode about communication. But it really, when you boil down into it, pretty much nobody is a really good communicator. You know, that's why there are people out there that teach classes on communication, why you have motivational speakers that make entire careers out of, you know, talking, why you can kind of intuitively tell the difference between somebody who is a good orator versus a terrible orator in their communication skills. But what it really
Hmm.
boils down to is whether you're dealing with, you know, your family or your, particularly if you're dealing with business, your team, your clients, is if you start with the basic assumption that you're not good at communicating with everyone, you kind of free yourself up to get better at it. You know, a lot of managers, I know we've seen this when we've also talked to people. I've had to bite my tongue on many a call when people start telling me how they work on their teams, of blaming the team for not performing when the team itself doesn't know what the hell they're supposed to be doing because
Hmm.
management isn't telling them, this is what we need you to be doing. Here's why we need you to be doing it. Here's the things we need you to look out for. And here's the additional considerations. You remove all that and then wonder, why the hell doesn't anyone know what's going on or what's happening? And, you know, we're losing money. I mean, it all comes down to communication, and you get better at communicating by just doing it. You can't, there's a certain point you can listen to this as we share our experiences, you can read articles, you can read books, but it you can't get better at it if you don't get out and go talk to people and muck it up and get a little bit better
Yeah.
each time.
Yeah, I think that's the important part for me too. I mean, mainly setting the expectation between the two or more parties, but you know, you have to allow for the human element side of it because like you said, I mean, we all suck at it and it's always changing. So, you got to give yourself and other people some grace and work be willing to like I think collaborate through things because like we've said, it's a two-way street and you have to be there for it to work and willing to, you know, work through some communication issues to then say, okay, this is how we work and this relationship is great because we now know how each other communicates.
Yeah, now we know if there's a mistake, it's not because they're trying to screw me over or because they're
Yeah.
dumb. It's just a genuine mistake, or okay, no, we can fix it.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, and then for anyone who's sitting there going, well, my personal, go to marriage counseling. Because guess what? It's all variations on a theme here. But I think as a general rule, we don't talk about that stuff because yeah, nothing better than telling somebody, well, no, the problems you're having at home are because you don't know how to communicate with your spouse. So good luck with that. I think I made the mistake of communicating that information once. Never again. Never gonna deal with that one or get in the middle of
Yep.
those. That was a good learning lesson. But I think we've communicated about communication enough here. Jesus, we could drone on and on and on and on
Agreed.
about it. But you know, as always, if anybody has any questions, anything, if we said that doesn't make sense because we didn't communicate it clearly, please don't hesitate to, you know, text, call. Don't call, please do not call. I don't want to communicate via phone here, but email, leave comments, let us know your questions. If you're listening to go, this doesn't seem right in my experience, that's totally fine. I'm sure there's experiences and situations out there where what we've gone through doesn't neatly translate, and we're always looking
Hmm.
to understand things better so that we can, you know, we can communicate what we've gone through better and help out more people.
Absolutely.
Alrighty, with that, everybody stay out of trouble, and we'll see you on the next episode.